You cannot just think, because we tried this 5 times in the past and never worked, it's not going to work the 6th time. You can't think that you have all the answers, or that you know everything that there is to know about a particular perspective or approach. So that's how we've tried to change ourselves. And I think in general in society, if people would just try to understand that a bit more, every single one of us can have good ideas. I may not agree with your good idea, but I should at least try to consider it and understand it.
Attention, all citizens of the future. Buckle up and step into our time tunnel of imagination to join us on an extraordinary journey into the days of futures past. We'll unearth those tantalizing portrayals of the future and beyond that captured imaginations in their time. Join me as we embark on exploring those futures we were promised, but which never arrived. So let's go to our guide, that excavator of the eventual, that historian of the hereafter, that recorder of retro futures, Theo Priestley.
Hello and welcome again to another Days of Future Past podcast, where I get to talk about futurism, visions of the future that came true and what didn't came true with a special guest. And here I have with me Mike Pell of Microsoft. And Mike, you have a very, very interesting career. And not only that, but you have invented what many would probably call parts of the future yourself. You are an inventor, not just an envisioner. Tell us a bit more about your career.
Hey, Theo, I'm so excited to be on this show. I'm a huge fan of yours. And as I always like to say, I am from the future. So we have lots to talk about. Yeah, I've seen just about everything. And so I can't wait to dig into this with you.
So you created the PDF, which billions, I would say, has impacted around the world. I mean, how did that come about?
It's a great story. It actually was a project that was done at Adobe very early 1990. And John Warnock, who was the CEO of Adobe, had a vision for being able to change documents between computers. At that time, you couldn't move a file from the Mac to the PC to a Unix box. It was impossible because it just didn't look right. You can get it there, but it wouldn't look anything like it started. So the vision was to try to figure out some interchange format and a playback mechanism to do that. And so I was part of a team that very, very quickly hacked together the very first, example of PDF. That was my job to I took a bunch of Illustrator files, took the headers off, hacked a PostScript interpreter, display PostScript to be able to show it on the screen. So that was really the beginnings of what turned into Acrobat. And I was also the first engineer assigned to that project way back when. So got to see it go from a vision in John Warnock's mind to being now a multi-billion-dollar business for Adobe.
You've been doing that ever since, I guess, which is having those visions and actually putting them together or hacking them together, which is very different from, what a lot of people do, which is dream of something and then just leave it behind. I mean, is there a spark or a process that gets you from having that vision and then enacting it on it?
I think it's curiosity, Theo. Really, for me, I've always been a designer and an artist and a technologist. And so being able to just do it myself has been a huge advantage to making that vision real. So not having to depend on other people or a team necessarily to just take an idea and make it real enough to go see if there was something there. So I think that being able to do rapid prototyping is a real great skill for anyone in any discipline to be able to get your ideas out there and just see if there's really something for people.
Is it something that should be taught in school or something that you actually really have to sort of learn for yourself? And, you learn by doing, in other words.
Yeah, no, I think it should be taught. I mean, outside of art programs or outside of engineering, rapid prototyping really isn't taught in that way. It may be called something different. But, now with generative AI and everything else we have at our disposal, it's so easy to generate these, little models or little working prototypes so quickly, faster than we've ever been able to do before. There's really no reason it shouldn't be part of the mainstream curriculum.
Do you see generative AI then being more useful than in that sense, rather than being lambasted for stealing creativity?
So first of all, as a creative person and an artist, I'm very sensitive to all the intellectual property issues and, artists being represented. So I don't like any of how that has gone down in the past. But moving forward, lots of companies, including Microsoft and Adobe, are making sure that when images and text and other things are generated, they are actually attributed, or licensed properly before putting them out there. So that part of the problem is being taken care of. But the thing that I think generative AI unlocks is creativity that you didn't necessarily know that you could be part of, or you don't have the time to learn. Like, I would love to be the world's greatest concept car sketcher. I don't have time to learn that. I would love to be the world's greatest 3D animator, like my friends at Pixar. I don't have time to do that. But guess what? You and I can be pretty damn good at that in just a few minutes.
It's funny you mentioned concept cars, actually, because I was looking at, your age, which we were born, child of the 60s, which were, coming out of the 50s and that atomic age and retrofuturism and grand visions of the future. And of course, the World's Fair, World of Tomorrow, Futurama and stuff like that. And I did a little digging around, and I did come across a really interesting concept car, which was a 3-wheeled concept car by Chevy Motors, called the Astro 3, which looks a bit like I can only describe it as a 3-wheeled version of the Viper from the old Battlestar Galactica movies. And I have to say, I mean, for me back then, a gas turbine engine. So I mean that you've got a bit of Batman in there as well from the old 60s as well.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, for me back then, there just seems to be what I call like unbridled imagination. So we didn't know what technology could achieve, and we didn't care in a sense. So we dreamt up anything that we could.
That was one of the things I thought about too, Theo, is that it was all very magical, right? The technology could do anything. And there was no thought to the practicality. It was just going to be that way.
Do you think we've lost a bit of that when we're trying to imagine what the future looks like, because we now know what technology does and we know its limitations, and we're almost now constrained and corralled with not being able to think beyond those boundaries anymore?
That's what I do every day in my job, helping people to figure out how to innovate. It's very frustrating for them, knowing that they're being asked to innovate or dream up these amazing new visions, but yet they are constrained, just as you said, with their own ideas of what's possible and what's not possible. I've always, as a creative person, I've wanted to know what the technologies were so that I could sort of gauge what was reasonable and what was feasible and what wasn't. But I never let it impact my ability to dream bigger or to think about leaping forward into the future. I think that is something we have to remind people of. And I ended up doing that every day here in the Microsoft garage, is saying, you know what? I know that you have budget constraints. I know you don't know how to do this. I know nobody has ever invented the technology to be able to achieve this, but we're going to do it anyway. So let's start with, where we're going to end up. And I actually encourage people to start from the future and not try to build up incrementally.
Do you think it's because we've become so data driven and we leap from quarter to quarter in a sense that we don't have the capacity to look beyond the data to I guess, feel our way through to the future and look beyond the next quarter or the next year?
I always like to say, I can't stand when people use the term data-driven. I think that's ridiculous to let data make a decision for you. I think we all need to be data-informed, right? We all are smart. We have brains in our heads. We can use data to help make decisions. But when you're using it, as you said, in a very short-term way, well, the data doesn't show this, so of course we can't do that. That's crazy, right? And that's not going to get us anywhere. And it's actually gotten us into trouble more times than not, because you're not taking the entire situation into account.
As an inventor, is there anything that you've seen recently, especially with CES going on, that's kind of lit your fire a little bit and got you excited?
Absolutely. For many years in the books that I've been writing, I've been talking about 3D projection without any type of optics, no headset, no glasses. That day is here. There's a company that's called Leia, like Princess Leia, that has been showing some amazing stuff on the floor at CES. I actually have a few of the devices here in the garage, and you can actually see something that breaks the plane, that is true 3D without wearing a headset, no glasses, and it's so convincing, and it's so incredibly emotionally connecting that, it's going to take over not only entertainment and gaming, which are the obvious first places to go, but also the enterprise for visualization. And that's really the focus of what my work has been and what I've been writing about recently.
So tell us more about your books then, because obviously you've got
Sure.
a number of books already out.
Yeah, it's so way back in 2017, I wrote a book called Envisioning Holograms, which has really been used now as a textbook on spatial computing. And actually, it's the subtext. It's funny that the Apple Vision is coming out now, 6 years later, and we were all talking about, I was talking about holograms and spatial computing way back when, and sort of gave people an approach. If you were a typical designer or engineer, hadn't really been exposed to anything like mixed reality or spatial computing, this is where to start. The second book I wrote, The Age of Smart Information, was really a tale told from the future. It really is when we flip the model. And instead of us having to figure out what all these charts and graphs and spreadsheets and reports are trying to tell us, they just tell us. Information is actually the intelligent part of this. Data is no longer dumb. It's actually, given the ability to not only show you the insights, but allow you to play what if. And then my new book, Visualizing Business, is what happens next after where we are right now. You take AI and data, advanced visualization techniques, and spatial computing, you combine them, and now we can finally see how our businesses work, from a process perspective, from a dynamic marketplace, from all the things that we know to be true yet are mostly invisible in business today. So it's very exciting. I love being right.
Does it pain you then when you write about the future in that way, and you still come across businesses who draw process maps with pen and paper and brown paper on the wall,
Yeah.
and haven't embraced any kind of automation at all?
I love drawing with pen and paper. I'm very analog, but like you, Theo, I can clearly see, and I can sort of project out and, triangulate what's about to happen. That's a natural skill for you. Like I said, I'm a big fan of your writing and your thinking. The problem is that you can't be too far ahead or it makes no difference, right? It has no value to be too early. So I need to learn how to be on time. You teach people all the time how to be on time. And so that's really the key is not to get frustrated that people are not, sort of moving to digital transformation, but help them see where they can have real impact right now by using some of these approaches.
Do you think a cost barrier and that fear of too much change at once is a problem then, still pervasive in businesses today?
Absolutely. But you know what? And it always has been, right? The cost to change is so great. Human beings cannot stand change, right? Nobody wants to change their behaviors. The hardest thing to do as an experiential designer is to try to get somebody to change their behavior at all, unless money's involved, and then they'll change their behavior. But what we're coming to now is the time when you have to change. None of us can be the same people we were 5 years ago or even 5 months ago. Things are moving so fast. AI is not something that's just going to be another technology trend that blows over. It's already embedded everywhere. This has already happened, and you cannot stand on the sidelines now.
It reminds me of when I first started work, when I entered the workforce and I worked for a bank, and we just started to get PCs into the workforce, where we had like dumb terminals before tied to the mainframe directly, and then we had PCs. And it was a very jarring period. For me, it was fine because I was always naturally curious, and I loved playing around with things. And I grew up playing around with Ataris, and then Atari ST, BBC Micro. So I was always surrounded by computers. But for people of a certain generation, when this hit them, they didn't know what to do. I still remember people complaining that they didn't know how to work the mouse because it got to the end of the desk and they didn't realize that you could pick it up and pull it back towards yourself to continue scrolling.
Yeah.
And do you feel that this is...
I don't know how the kids use computers without mice. I don't know.
Do you think that we're kind of reaching this point again with, generationally with AI, or do you think AI is so fundamentally different that people can pick it up instantly because it's more intuitive, it understands us on a language level, even more than a human level?
Yeah, it is transformational in exactly that way, Theo. It's because it is conversational that the giant leap has been made. So we used to spend all of our time trying to be pixel perfect and trying to get all of our screens to be just right, so all of that's out the window now. Like, frankly, the whole thing is figuring out how to be as natural as we can, as if you were talking to a person, what would you expect them to do? What could they do for you? And so for now, I think that people have, when they've had a problem with technology in the past, that maybe can be erased because they can talk to things now. I've noticed myself, some people love talking to their remote control, to try to get to a certain channel. They have no problem with that. They have no problem telling, Siri or Alexa what they need. And so it's the same exact thing. The fear of technology, I think, will be eliminated in some cases because it's just like talking to a person.
Do you think like the design interfaces, as a designer, are going to fundamentally change in the future as well? So we will no longer need screens and drop downs and radio buttons and things like that. It will literally be almost like a command line that we just talk to.
Yeah, I do think there's always going to be a place for screens or projection, and because we're very visual creatures, but it may literally be projection through whatever, different projectors that are mounted in the furniture, in the walls, in the desks. We are in the age now of ambient computing, right? We are building all of our computing infrastructure into the things around us. And so, yes, we are definitely moving away from, what we have always used, our computers and our phones and, things that we had to interact with, to where it will just be in the environment and it will be much more natural.
Does that not scare you as part of Microsoft when you can see a time when there might not be a Word or an Excel interface? For me, I kind of projected forward and thought, well, maybe in 20 years' time, we won't have behemoth systems like an SAP or an ERP type system or a finance system that we traditionally know because it's full of screens. Because we can just ask, well, what's happening in finance today? Where's my invoice?
Right.
Did you pay this supplier?
But also show me, right, Theo? It's like, so you would ask, but it will show you. Because again, we're visual creatures. We love seeing things because it helps us to understand. So I do think there will always be a visual component where it makes sense, but you won't necessarily have to interact with it primarily, through a GUI or a visual means. You can, certainly, but I think the conversational interface is really taking hold now. And we as an industry are trying to figure out how to make that as natural as possible.
Does that mean then that my needs as a user will be completely different from your needs, and therefore the interface that is projected to me will be completely different to you, even though the request might be the same, because generative AI is essentially understanding us both different from a contextual point of view and the way our minds work?
Yeah, it's a great insight, Theo. So think about this. We can both talk to a system, and you and I will ask very different questions to start off to try to get to the same end. But we don't have to look at the same GUI or the same screen-based interface to start that interaction. We literally could just type something in or talk as our starting point, which could be anything. And so there is a huge shift underway. And yes, I think we've always tried to make interfaces more adaptive and adaptable, but this is the ultimate adaptation because we don't know where you're going to start.
Could this be the end of the operating system itself as we know it then?
As a technologist, I would say no, because there's always got to be something underlying all these systems, right? You're a systems thinker, you understand how these things work. There's got to be something, behind the curtain and underneath the desk, right? That sort of keeps everything moving along. So the OS will always be there. It may not be a visual operating system as we're used to now. It'll be, an experiential type of thing. Often you'll see the videos like of the Apple Vision Pro with the icons floating in the air. That's a fine place to start, I suppose. I think we can do a little bit better, but you get the idea, right? It doesn't have to be the way it's always been.
So let's go back a little bit, back to your childhood and growing up in the 60s and having those kind of visions of the future that look wildly different today. What inspired you back then as a child, especially to get you onto this path that you are here now? Were you always thinking about the future?
I was. I, like many people back then, wanted to be an astronaut and a Formula One driver, but I'll start with astronaut. In society, we were all mesmerized by what was happening with the Apollo program. I literally watched the first man step on the moon. So we all, in all of the television shows and, some of the movies and, the writings, it was all about space travel and about living in space. And so, one of my earliest influences was that idea that somehow it was completely natural to think that we would all be living in space. And then, of course, that's supported by everybody's favorite cartoon, the Jetsons, all the TV shows of the day that came later, Lost in Space and Star Trek, and, all of these amazing visions of what could be. So that's what really captured my imagination, was that notion that, we are going to be traveling. We are going to be explorers. There are going to be these amazing, things that come with us. And there was a secondary part of all of that, that I'm sure we'll get into, which was when you're in space, you're going to space, you're living in space, there are these robots, that act just like people, right? And nobody gave a second thought to the fact that that thing was exactly like a person. And so that's where I started as far as inspiration.
Picking up on the robotic side of things, and I spoke with another guest about back in the early 70s, a Chinese restaurant in Pasadena actually had 2 robot servants who looked a bit like a trash can with a dome, essentially R2-D2 with a couple of arms. And we're aware of now, especially in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, that there are a large number of startups working on the robotic side of things, of AI. And we can see that merging of robotics, general purpose robotics, with generative AI. Are you excited to see that coming true after, 60 years, I guess?
I am, just like flying cars, robots are the future we were promised that we never got. There have been fits and starts, and we certainly have worked with our share of robots here and there. One of the most frightening things I've seen is adding a generative AI interface to the Boston Dynamics, yellow dog robot.
Yeah.
gotta rethink that one a little bit. But there is a lot of promise with all of this, because there are so many things that would be better, if we could have some type of mechanical assistance, whether it's with lifting or supporting or just doing things that are either difficult or just, something like we're using generative AI for now, tedious tasks. Do we want to displace people? No. But do we want to be assisted in that way? Of course. And that is sort of our future, right? That's our birthright, is to be able to go live in space and have robots.
If we're not going to displace people, then, and I won't get into the UBI debate or anything else like that, and we'll try and sort of keep this more optimistic. But does having general purpose, or certainly robotics that do the mundane tasks, free us up to basically become that space, faring nation, or that space-faring civilization, because we are driven to expand beyond where we are today, because robotics and AI is taking away the menial and the busy work from us?
Yeah. In part, I'll sort of cite a few examples. I'm sure you've watched the movie Interstellar many times, right? So, of course, there's the robot assistant that helps them on a very long-range space flight. So that certainly, I believe, will be part of, as we go off to explore different parts of the solar system and then, into deeper space, we'll have to have some type of robotics to help. It's not just going to be AI embedded systems. There's got to be some physical aspect to that where robots can come in handy. They don't have to go into cryo chambers, right? They can sort of stay awake and do what needs to be done. But the other part of that, I'm watching a series called For All Mankind on Apple TV, which is wonderful. It's an alternate timeline, and I would say alternate ending to the space race. But it reminded me, the reason that I became so enamored with space flight and wanting to be an astronaut was because at our core, we are curious and explorers. And I don't think that, any of our desire to use AI and robotics is going to be driven, especially for space, by anything other than our desire to want to explore, and those being technologies to help us get there.
As explorers, then, how do we embed that into future generations' mindset? And again, it goes back to, I guess, the point about education and getting people to hack together and prototype and think. There has to be some way that we can embed a futurist kind of mindset as well, where people are free to think beyond where they are in the here and now. Because being in the here and now, you kind of get bogged down with your own, self-centered details. And how do we move not only individuals, but even communities and society in general to start thinking much like the Star Trek, where everyone moves in the same direction at the same time?
Mhm. If you look back at the Apollo program, and what was even happening before that, it was inspired, by Kennedy and others saying like, "Hey, there's this giant opportunity in front of all of us. We need to broaden, like rise our eyes, to the skies. We need to think about the stars. We need to think bigger than ourselves." And I think that a lot of this needs to come from the people in society, whether they're the parents, the teachers, or politicians, celebrities, whoever, to try to broaden people's view and to try to get it out of the here and now. Like, yes, this world is very messed up right now, and we have a lot of problems to deal with right now, right here. But we also have to start thinking about the future again. It was disappointing to hear that the first manned landing on the moon is now set back, by another year or two. But at least we're trying. It was nice to hear that we're trying to get back to that realm of exploring and just seeing how far we can go. Because if we don't make a gigantic change, we are going to continue on the path of wrecking this planet, and who knows exactly what's going to happen. But we have to start thinking much, much bigger. And my experience, working a lot with students and younger people is they have the desire. I mean, they are a generation of do-gooders, right? They want to save the world. They want to do the right thing. And so I think just repeating the message and giving them the opportunity to not only talk about the future, but be part of designing it and building it is going to be where, all of us benefit.
I think that's the important part, is the agency that everybody has in building or certainly stating the type of future that they want and trying to keep it optimistic in a sense. It's very easy to sort of fall down into the sort of negative or the dystopian view that everything is terrible and we're building, much like my previous guest Bronwyn was saying, everything seems to be all around surveillance rather than moving forward beyond that because there's a monetary or a financial element to it. How do we bottle that optimism that was certainly prevalent around in the 60s and the moon, with the moonshot, and give it to everybody to make them understand that they do have a stake in the future. Even though they're an individual, they have that stake and a voice to shape it and to some way design it and build it themselves.
Going back to what you said earlier about education, maybe changing the curriculum to show people that they don't just have to learn a skill, or go get a degree and then try to figure out how to get a job. We can teach people to be explorers and entrepreneurs and people who know how to rapid prototype, very, very well in any phase. It could be in public policy. It could be in figuring out how to bring clean water into a village. It could be so many different areas where the students sort of go through their educational process with the idea that they are here to help the greater good. They're here to help society, rather than figure out how to make as much money as they can personally. So maybe that's a big shift that we need to help, not only in education, but just in general. And then, as much as we can show people that there is a bright future and that, yes, again, the world has a lot of problems right now, but we don't have to completely focus on that. We can work at the same time to try to get to this better future. So I think a lot of it will be, the repetition of the message, showing positive imagery and giving people, as they're young and they're getting older and going through their careers and their lives, the opportunity to make those big changes and see the impact that even a small group of people can have.
So tell us more about Microsoft Garage, because it does sound really fascinating that there is this kind of like, skunk works in a sense going on in Microsoft. I like these ideas.
Originally, maybe it was that, but now it's actually a gigantic global program for innovation. We set up an opportunity for people anywhere in the world to be able to take their ideas and make them real. To work with people that they've never worked with on their own teams or, across, different continents. We run the world's biggest hackathon every year, which is an opportunity for people to band together and take on a challenge with just a few days and get something prototyped and then try it out, see if it works. And so we've actually changed the culture of Microsoft by being more curious, by hacking, by just trying these things and not always just sticking to, the plan. Like, okay, well, we know we have to do this, so we're just going to, keep our heads down. We actually look around quite a bit and we stop and we consider and we try new things. And so as a team, the Microsoft Garage team has helped people, our employees and our customers and partners around the world to sort of take their passion and make it real. So it's a lot of fun. Beats having a real job.
Has there been something that has come out of the garage that you've seen actually catch hold?
Oh, many, many, many things. If you go to Microsoft.com/Garage, there's a tab called Wall of Fame where you can look at some of the projects that have come out. But some of the most impactful are incredibly personal. One of the best projects that happened years and years and years ago was a guy who was in the garage. He was a gamer. He was also a veteran. Some of his buddies had lost their arms, and they were having trouble using the Xbox controller with one hand. And so he was experimenting, and he said, you know what, I have this idea where I can hook up something like a drum pad to the controller, and maybe they can use their feet or some other part of their body to do this a little bit more easily. So we said, hey, there's a hackathon next week. Why don't you form a team and go see what you can build? And he did. And this team were not, experts in all of these things, but they learned what they had to make a quick prototype. Fast forward a little bit, the person who was running Xbox at the time saw this hack project, said, hey, what's that? And they did a demo. They went off to the Xbox team to show them. Fast forward a little bit more, we come out with a product called the Xbox Adaptive Controller, which opened up accessible gaming for tens of thousands of people around the world who never had an opportunity to play in that new way. And so we went all in. And by the way, that same year, that project, which started off as a single person little hack project who formed a team and went and built a prototype, that turned into Microsoft's Super Bowl commercial that year. So all the way from a single person just trying to help his friends, right? A very, very personal thing to actually helping people across the entire world to be able to have, fun, enjoy, and to learn new things through accessible gaming.
One, I know, I remember that story, and as a gamer myself with an Xbox in the corner there, I can totally relate to that. The other thing is that for one person to have an idea and not be shot down by it or by someone else, I think is extremely impactful as well. It was something a topic that came up in a previous podcast as well, which is there seems to be a reticence to be able to communicate ideas because of a fear of being shot down by other people, by peers, as being, oh, why would I waste my time on this? Why would you waste your time on this? Why does this need to exist? And how do we overcome that? I mean, obviously in Microsoft's garage, everybody's ideas are welcomed and you have your hackathon. But for someone else sitting in a community who wants to make a difference to that community, who has that kind of introversion or that fear of being shot down, how do they just keep going?
We all have to recognize and acknowledge and walk the walk, knowing that everyone has great ideas. Every single person is capable of great ideas. All they need is an opportunity to try them out, right? To voice them, to talk about them, to debate, to experiment. And so as a company, culturally, we had to change ourselves. And Satya Nadella, our CEO, who started, as CEO about 10 years ago, wanted to make sure that everybody really believed in that. It's a very simple principle, but it's so true. Good ideas come from anywhere and anyone. And we have to be able to be open-minded. He talks about the growth mindset. It's really allowing yourself to say, you know what, maybe this could be something. Let me know more about it. Let's talk about this. You cannot have a fixed mindset. You cannot just think, because we tried this 5 times in the past and never worked, it's not going to work the 6th time. You can't think that you have all the answers or that you know everything that there is to know about a particular perspective or approach. So that's how we've tried to change ourselves. And I think in general in society, if people would just try to understand that a bit more, every single one of us can have good ideas. I may not agree with your good idea, but I should at least try to consider it and understand it.
And of course, that culture and that mindset is manifested into Microsoft now overtaking Apple as the world's most valuable company. So there obviously has to be something in it, for sure.
We've been on a tear lately.
Do you think you'll ever get to space yourself? You had your dreams of being an astronaut back in the day. Space is becoming far more accessible as as the costs become lower. Mm-hmm. Bezos is talking about space hotels and more orbital facilities. Do you think that you and I will ever get to a point in our age, in our old age, where we can afford a ticket like you could buy, a Concorde ticket and get a seat somewhere?
Well, I think the active word there is afford. But one of the movies that I was very influenced by when I was young was 2001. Right, so Kubrick had this great vision, and the movie did an outstanding job of portraying space tourism. Right, there was this super elegant thing that actually kind of looked like a Concorde that could take you up into space. I do think that sometime, before we die, we would have the opportunity to be space tourists. Maybe not that cushy. I kind of hope it would be, but I do think that that's definitely possible.
I think it's more, for me, it's more like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Ad Astra, when Brad Pitt straps himself into a very small, cramped capsule that's sitting on top of a rocket, and of course you're charged, was it $100 for a cushion or a blanket? I think that's probably more akin to what it's going to be like for us.
Maybe
than the cushy number from 2001.
Well, I'm an optimist, Theo, so I'm always going for the cushy, sleek version.
As a parting thought, then, Mike, is there anything that you would love to see that come true that hasn't come true from the past, from a retro future perspective?
Yeah, I'll actually answer that the other way around. I'm not so sure flying cars are a good idea. I love, all the visions of the future, whether it's Blade Runner or The Fifth Element, or, there's so many great visions of flying cars. And if we could make it that safe and that convenient, great. But I don't know.
There's actually a chapter in the book that we published with Bronwyn specifically on flying cars, and it's funny because even at CES there's been a couple of new versions. I think Hyundai has got a flying car prototype again, or a VTOL, and I just can't see it because I look at my city, which is Edinburgh, very old Gothic kind of city architecture, and I just think there's nowhere and no way that you could actually accept these unless entire cities were completely changed. And of course, that means changing cities again for technology rather than for people. And I think we need to get out of the mindset of changing things around the technology and making sure that the people are actually in the center of anything that we do.
That's what I always say, Theo, right? It's never about the technology. It's always about the people.
Mike, where can we learn more about you, Microsoft Garage, and the books you've written as well?
Sure. You can go to my website, mike-pell.com, or check out my most recent book, visualizingbusiness.com, to get all the latest info. Or check out the Microsoft Garage at microsoft.com/garage.
Mike, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Anytime, Theo. I can't wait to see you.
That's another exciting episode of Days of Futures Past wrapped up. Thanks to Mike for joining us on this journey. Thank you for listening and watching this journey, and we'll catch you next time for another guest and another chat about futures.
This is Days of Futures Past signing off, when we'll once again peel back the curtain on more lost futures. Stay tuned, and remember, the future may be here, but the past never fades. Until next time. Days of Futures Past was brought to you by Theo Priestley, keynote speaker, author, and retro-futurist. If you'd like to appear as a guest and reminisce about futures gone by, get in touch. I've been your radio host, Andrew Helbig. Goodbye for now.